Good morning, church.
Good morning.
What a beautiful, cool Sunday morning. What a great day for a picnic. I hope you are making plans this afternoon to join us for the conclusion of our Family Emphasis Month as we gather together in the park and enjoy fellowship, enjoy nature, enjoy one another, enjoy God, and remember what it means to be a family. Isn't it great to be a part of such a great church family? So remember that. The other thing I want to remind you of is you've probably seen some advertisements toward our big event that's coming up in October. On October the 7th through the 11th, that's a Saturday night through Wednesday, we are having what we're calling our fall renewal. Now what that is it's going to be a version of a gospel meeting. But rather than the traditional gospel meeting where we have a single speaker who comes and follows a specific theme and who preaches every lesson for Sunday through Wednesday, we're going to have 3 different speakers come. On Sunday, all 3 will speak. One will speak for both worship services. The other will speak for the joint Bible class hour. And then someone else will speak on Sunday night. And they'll all have a basic theme. We're talking about standing on the promises of faith, the providence of God, the provision of God. But then on Monday night through Wednesday night, each of these 3 men will have their own individual classes. We'll have a short devotional in here, and then we'll be able to separate and go to whatever class we choose. You'll be able to choose a topic and a speaker that best addresses what you feel you need spiritually in your life. And that way it sort of works as a workshop. It tailors to each member's individual needs. Now I want to tell you that we have 3 fantastic men who are coming to preach for us during that week. First, we have Scott Gleaves. He is the head of the Bible department at Faulkner University in Montgomery, Alabama, and one of the most effective pulpit preachers I know. And I know you'll be greatly uplifted by his eloquent and challenging style of preaching. The second man is Kevin Swiger. Now, Kevin Swiger has been my dear friend for close to 20 years now. And the way that I became acquainted with Kevin is through my dad. My dad came out all those years ago here to the Midwest from California. And he kind of made it a double trip. He came to see my uncle, Randy, who was dying of lung cancer. He wanted to see his brother one more time. And then after that, he went to a conference. And although Daddy didn't make it a habit to go to interfaith or denominational type conferences, he had heard the particular speaker of this conference on the radio and was very impressed by how close the man was getting in regard to his belief on salvation and baptism and the importance and essentiality of baptism. And so my dad prayed and said, I want to go listen to this man, and Lord, help me to be an influence on him. Well, as a matter of fact, my dad went to the conference. He was uplifted somewhat by the conference, and he never got an opportunity to share with that preacher any more information about the gospel. But he did sit next to a young Ohio denominational preacher. And that young man didn't know anybody else there, so he and my daddy started conversing, and they made a friendship, and they had coffee together, and they went out to eat, and they exchanged email addresses. And over the course of the next 6 or 7 months, they emailed back and forth as Kevin would ask my daddy Bible questions, and my dad would answer them. And they built a friendship based upon study and faith. Finally, in October of that year, they were having a lectureship out there in California, and they asked Kevin to come out and attend. That's where I met Kevin, because he was in the last stages of his spiritual journey in regard to studying the Word. I was closer to his age, so my dad invited me into those studies. So one night, we stayed up till late, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning, sitting at the office of the Woodward Park Church of Christ in Fresno, California. And we studied questions of conversion, baptism, the remission of sins, salvation. He asked every question about the thief on the cross. He asked questions about Cornelius. And we struggled and wrestled with them together and turned to the Word of God. And Kevin left and went home. And a month after that point, he called my dad and said, I want to be baptized into Jesus Christ. He flew to California. He was baptized into Christ. He flew home. He got up, and in excitement and joy, he preached the gospel the next Sunday in his church. And he was let go before the service was over. And asked to be out of the preacher's home in 2 weeks. Having nowhere to go, the church in California heard about this, and here this man had just come to the full knowledge of the faith. And so they juggled their church budget and made a position as an associate minister for Kevin. Kevin worked there for a couple years. He went then on to Sunset School of Preaching to gain more Bible knowledge. And for the last 16, 17 years, he's been preaching the gospel. And is currently the preacher in Corona, California. He's going to come, and his classes will engage us on how to reach out to our religious friends and neighbors. And no one is more qualified on that subject than Kevin Swiger. The third is a very young man, 23 years old, preaches in Decatur, Illinois, and is very dear to my heart. He's the young man who graduated at the age of 21, and in Arkansas he came and worked in the office right next to Kerry Williams for a year as our resident minister, which in essence means an intern. And everywhere I went for a year, he went with me. Every visit I made, he visited with me. We ate lunch almost every day together, and I had a curriculum put together on how to become a preacher, not just in knowledge, not just in knowing the Scriptures, but in regard to the practical aspects of ministry. And now Bobby has gone forth and has been a great success in being a gospel preacher in his own congregation. So I know he'll be a very encouraging young man to listen to. So I hope you're excited and you mark on your calendar October the 7th through the 11th. We'll start with a dinner speaker here on Saturday night. It'll be a great time. There's only about 100 spots because, you know, we can't fit everybody in a dinner environment here in the building. So it'll be first to sign up. We'll be able to come to that, and we'll have a dinner speaker. And then, of course, then on Sunday we'll hear all three speakers, and then Monday through Wednesday you'll be able to choose which classes best fit your spiritual needs. So be looking forward to fall renewal 2017 here at the Waterford Church of Christ. Today we are concluding our study of Family Emphasis Month. And I want to talk to you about what it means to be a family heritage of faith. We all know that the church is a family. We understand that perhaps even better at Waterford than other brethren do, because I have never been a part of a congregation that feels more like a family than this one. And for that, I applaud you. But this idea of being a family, I'm not sure that in our present society that the idea of family hasn't been diminished to the point that people really don't understand what it means to be a family. And when you look at that text that Todd read for us a few moments ago, Paul is speaking to the Romans about this idea of having a heritage, a family, a faith that began with Abraham and is rooted in the promises of God made to him, our Father, which apply to all of his children of that spiritual family forever to the very end of time. And when we consider what that means, we realize that God made covenant oaths to his people, to his family. And an oath is a promise that is rooted in the understanding that it cannot be broken. Now, we've had those kind of promises to our family. I heard about a newspaper ad in a Louisiana paper that came out, and its wording was quite comical. Because it says, a grandfather with a big mouth seeks a pony for a granddaughter who won't let me forget a promise I made. Well, that's the nature of a promise, is it not? I mean, you make a promise, and when you make it to your family, every one of us have been there, right? Your little boy, Daddy, you're going to make my T-ball game this afternoon. And you're like, ooh, it's at 4:30, and I'm supposed to be at work till 5. And so you rush into the office and you work hard all day with the idea that I've got to find a way to cut out of here early because I made a promise to a little boy on second base. Right? That's the binding nature of an oath, of a promise that we make to family. And when we look in places like Genesis chapter 22, verses 16 through 18, we see this illustrated powerfully as God institutes this promise. And he says, and he said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. And in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemy. And your seed, by your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. You notice God doesn't leave himself any wiggle room in that promise. He doesn't leave himself a legal out. He simply says, Abraham, God is so moved by the faith of Abraham, a faith that, frankly, this old boy can't understand, that he would take his son, his only son of his lineage, and march him up that mountain after that journey, that he would hold that knife in his hand and with tears in his eyes, because God commanded it, be willing to sacrifice him. It's unfathomable. And God is so moved. Of course, he doesn't have to sacrifice Isaac. That was never God's intention in the first place. It was a test. Life is filled with tests. But Abraham passes it A+ with flying colors. And God says to him, and you can almost hear the emotion in God's voice as he says to him, because you have done this thing and not withhold your son, I'm not going to just bless you. I make an oath that I'm going to bless you and all of your family forever and ever. And the text there in Romans says that doesn't just mean the physical descendants. It is more powerful than that. It's more intricate than that. The family of Abraham is not limited to those who physically are of his blood. The family of Abraham involves those who are adopted into his lineage through faith. That means you. Every one of you is made this promise in Genesis chapter 22 by a God who is never an oath breaker. We are a family heritage of faith. So according to this text today, the promise is made to each of us in that heritage, in that lineage. You see, the idea of a heritage speaks of honor. It speaks of tradition. It speaks of inheritance. It speaks of a godly pride in the one thing in this world that does last. You know, we talk about things in this world don't have any ability to last. And that's true. I mean, no matter what you drive, it'll rust, especially if you live in Michigan. It's going to rust. Where moth and rust destroy, Jesus had Michigan in mind. You know, when you think about the homes that we live in, someday termites or rot, they will be for nothing. Even the great structures of mankind, nothing in this world. You know, you don't take anything with you when you go, but you do leave some things behind. First of all, you do take your faith with you when you go. Excuse me. And you can take others with you when you go. But when it comes to, well, that's a frog in your throat for sure. There we go. When it comes to this family heritage of faith, we can take others with us when we go, but we can leave something behind in this world. We can leave behind a great lineage. A lineage of faith. Now, we've lost that a little bit. Sam Rayburn didn't inherit anything physically from his father. And someone said to him, thank you, brother. Someone said to him, Mr. Rayburn, it's unfortunate your father didn't leave you anything. He said, don't ever say that again. He said, my father left me an untarnished name. And I'd rather have that than all the possessions of the world. Beaumarchais, who was one of the French who helped America in the American Revolution, went back home to France. And in France, someone talked and discussed and kind of chided him about his lowly lineage, his lowly birth, not born into a noble or a rich family. And he said, I don't know about all that, but I know this. There is no one in this world with whom I would exchange fathers. See, he understood that godly pride of what it means to be a heritage of faith. And I'll tell you, when we consider all of this, I think that our society has missed it somewhat. Now, I don't agree with all the conclusions of the book, but in the early 20th century, there was a Spanish political philosopher, writing, I think, from Madrid, who wrote a book called The Revolt of the Masses. Now, Revolt was a book that was intended to be a criticism of the democratic system of government, the system of government we have in the United States. And he was writing this political commentary as a result of both the American and then later the French revolutions. And especially the French Revolution, because the nature of bloodshed and just all of the tragedy that took place in the French Revolution puts our revolution to shame. And it was all to bring about democracy, where everyone had a voice and everyone had a vote. And Ortega de Gasset, although I love democracy and I don't agree with his conclusions, he did make some intriguing arguments. Because his basic criticism was built upon his concern for the demise of what he calls the noble aristocracy. You know what that was, right? Back in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and even into the Renaissance and Enlightenment. You have these European noble families. And they're people who have manors, and they have serfs who would work on their manor. And so you'd have these family lines. You remember all those European, anybody ever ordered a crest, a family crest? Doesn't mean very much here in the United States in our culture, but in ancient times, especially if you go back just a few hundred years, that meant a lot of what family you came from. And it represented your heritage, your lineage. And he says that there'll come a time, and frankly, it's kind of scary because de Gasset's predictions are sort of coming true. He says there'll come a time when democracy will fall because the masses, the common people, that would be you and I, will realize that they can vote things for themselves. And so they will. He says, but it's the responsibility of an aristocracy who has been raised generation after generation after generation with a mantle of responsibility. With a mantle of knowing you are responsible for other people. And you have to do this because all of those folks who work on your land rely upon your judgment, upon your leadership, and you owe it to them. But not just that, even more than that, you owe it to your family. You owe it to your father, and your father's father, and your father's father's father, and on back throughout generation after generation, to not mar the name and to keep the family pride, dignity intact. We don't really think about that in our culture, do we? In fact, I think there's a lot of folks who don't know the name of their great-grandparents. And especially not their great-great-grandparents. If you were to ask people today, and it's not so much a problem physically, I'm simply trying to say that we sometimes don't see the power and the gravity of this idea of heritage, of this concept of being a part of a long line. In my own personal life, it's been a responsibility, a burden, and a joy. I've been told all my life about my great-grandfather, Ernest Williams. Great-grandpa Ernest, he was not a Christian. But he kind of started the path because he was a very good man. In fact, when I was pulled over by a policeman when I was in high school there in our hometown, Southern Illinois, right across the river from Kentucky, that policeman, when he found out my name, didn't write me a ticket. And I was going really fast. And he said, "You just tell your granddaddy I said hello." Well, I went and asked my granddad about it, and I found out about great-grandpa Ernest. You see, that policeman lived on the same block as my great-grandfather, and my great-grandfather had the only job during the Great Depression of anybody on that block. So every Friday when he got paid, he went and he bought a hog, and he and the other men in the neighborhood would butcher and cook that hog. And everybody would come by and they'd divide it between everybody who lived on the block. And that little boy lived on that block. That's my heritage. And then there was my Grandpa James, his son. I did know Grandpa James. What I remember most is he took me fishing. But the other thing is my grandpa, he had a drawer in his bedroom. And if you opened up this drawer, it didn't have socks or underwear. This drawer was filled with watches and pocket knives, mostly, and other trinkets. And I asked him one time, "Grandpa, why do you have so many watches and pocket knives?" "Oh, well, just collected them through the years." So I asked my dad, and Dad said, he said, Grandpa, he owned a junkyard, struggled to get by. But whenever somebody came and they needed an alternator and they didn't have enough money, they'd say, "Jimmy, I don't have enough for that, but would you take my pocket knife and I'll pay you later." And so for alternators and water pumps, my grandfather had a drawer full of pocket knives and pocket watches because he just wanted to be good to people. See, I'm proud of that. And then there was my dad, who went to a tent meeting, although he wasn't a Christian at 17 years of age, was stirred to hear the gospel, marched the aisle and was baptized into Christ, and started preaching 2 weeks later, and will still be in the pulpit after 50 plus years this morning. That's a heritage. And it's powerful. It's special. And it helps us. You see, a heritage is helpful because it helps us when we face tough times to not just think about what's good for me, but to think about what would we do? How do our people handle these kind of circumstances? A heritage is a powerful context to living. It's a chain made up of link after link after link after link, which represents generation after generation after generation. And as we consider all that this means, we look in Galatians chapter 3, 6 through 7, where Paul says, "Even as Abraham believed God, it was accounted to him for righteousness. Know ye therefore that they which are in the faith, the same are children of Abraham." So today, I'm not trying to emphasize that you need to go through heritage.com or or Ancestry.com and try to figure out who your great-grandparents and great-great-parents were and what your lineage is and what your family crest is. That's really not important. What's important is that you understand you're a part of something bigger than all of that. You're a part of a more important and a more noble heritage than anybody else in this world participates in. Bigger than being a part of Ernest or James or Stan Williams. You are a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You are a part of a noble, glorious chain of generation after generation. You see, this represents several things. First of all, we see that the links of this chain are very, very important. In Genesis chapter 50, verse 24, it says, "And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." There he mentions the links of the chain. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Now there's Joseph. And he says, the promises will be fulfilled. Because the promise was made to the entire chain, the entire heritage. Think about the links of this great chain. Abraham, the father of faith, the beginning of our family. Consider the greatness of his faith. Not just that he would take Isaac up the mountain, but that he left Ur of the Chaldeans in the first place. On the instruction of a voice of a God, that it tells us in Joshua, Abraham and his fathers, before that point, they worshiped the pagan gods of Ur of the Chaldeans. But he hears this voice, and with remarkable faith, he abandons all of that, and he heads out for a country that he knows not. Then there's Isaac, who follows in that same faith of his father. Then there's Jacob, although he had his issues, no doubt. He still comes around and he still lives out that faith and is the father of those 12 sons, one of whom is Joseph. And again, the promise is passed on. And when we consider our faith, who we are, we seldom consider how far back this heritage goes. When you look around at one another right here in this auditorium, we probably don't think about the fact that we're connected through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob. That we are one powerful family with the same crest. With the same crest. The same lineage. The same promises. And the same future. Then we consider the strength of this chain. The strength is found not in the links, and this is important because in physical families, in a physical lineage, sometimes they'll say all it takes is one weak link in the chain and it'll all be over, it'll all falter. And that may be true in this world. But this chain, the beauty of this chain is you may look and say, well, I'm the weak link in the chain. And certainly there were times when I think Jacob probably felt like he was the weak link in the chain. And you can look at other characters. There was a time when David was the weak link in the chain. There was a time when Peter was the weak link in the chain. And there'll be a time when you're the weak link in the chain. And there have been many moments when I felt like the weak link in the chain. But here's the difference between a physical earthly lineage and this lineage. This lineage is not built upon the strength of every link. Our lineage is built upon the strength of the Maker. In Genesis chapter 15:1, it says, after all these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceedingly great reward. As God makes His promises, He shows that He Himself is the guarantee of their fulfillment. You see, if there is a weak link in the chain, if that weak link breaks, God's right there to take the next link and to reattach it. I hear people ask, well, where was the church during all those years of the Dark Ages? Well, it existed. Have no doubt. Now, we have trouble in the historical record finding it sometimes, but you don't have to worry that it existed. But even if it didn't, that's not a problem. Because if there were weak links in the chain, God is always tending this chain. Always reattaching. Always reconnecting. Always making it whole once more. That's why Joseph could have such confidence. That's why we can quote Hebrews chapter 11 when it says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. Substance! It's real! And it is the assurance, the guarantee of things not seen. There's an old Irish fable that says, there's a little in the fiddle, but there's much in he who holds the bow. And so if you feel like a weak link in the chain, don't worry. The Maker makes it strong. Finally, we realize the nature of this chain. It is composed not of flesh and blood. It is composed not of DNA. Our heritage of faith, our chain, is composed of faith. It is the family of those who wholeheartedly trust in God. In Romans, the text that was read for us a moment ago, in Romans chapter 4, 11 through 13, and he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of faith, which he had while still uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all those who believe, though they are uncircumcised, that righteousness might be imputed to them. And then verse 12, and the father of circumcision, to those who are of the circumcision, but to those who walk in the steps of faith, which our father Abraham had while still uncircumcised. For the promise that he would be heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. That's what our chain is all about. Faith. The faith family began with Abraham's absolute trust in the will and the provision of God. It was faith which loved God more than this world. That's what it tells us about Abraham. He loved God more than this world. There was faith that relied upon God rather than self. Romans 4:19 through 22, it says, and being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body now dead when he was about 100 years old, neither yet the deadness of Sarah's womb. But he staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith, giving glory to God. See, it began with faith. And every strong link will only be strong and made a part of the chain because of faith. And Abraham placed his life wholeheartedly in the Master's hand. You see, we live in a culture that doesn't really recognize the power of a heritage. Nevertheless, in the family of God, we do. Because we are a part of something. And as we leave this study that we've engaged in for the last 4 weeks on what it means to be the family of God, I hope that this will resonate in your heart as you move forward for the rest of this year till we come to August 2018 and look at it all again, so that you'll know every day that you don't face this world alone, And as you look around and as you come to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, when you go to the golf outing or come to the potluck and you look around at people who on the surface look like everybody else, people at work, people that you're engaged with in other aspects of your life, they don't look any different, but they are different. That person sitting to your left or to your right has the same family crest, the same father, the same lineage, and inherits the same promises. We are a family lineage of faith. This morning, if you're not yet a part of the family of God, you can be born anew into a new family. A great family. You can, all the weakness in your life, all the struggle can be done away with, and you can be made into an unbreakable link of the most powerful chain that stretches through all of human history. Romans chapter 6 tells us that, don't you know that as many of you as were baptized into Christ were baptized into His death, having been buried with Him through baptism into death, we rise to walk in newness of life. What newness of life is that? When we're born into a new family. You need to come today. Come right now as we stand and as we sing.